This is Econ Solutions, looking at evaluating monopoly and perfect competition in the Unit 3 topic content. So the first thing to talk about when evaluating monopolies and perfect competition is their aim is to increase well-being or welfare of consumers to its maximum. And economic efficiency is where the firms minimise their costs with the least undesired side effects for those consumers. So no benefit is lost to them, but they're also minimising their costs. So there's a few different types of efficiency which I'm going to talk about, and then also I'll explain how they link in with monopolies and in the perfectly competitive market. The first type of efficiency to know is productive efficiency. Now this is where at the lowest possible cost per unit of output, you're productively efficient. So essentially what that means is on the lowest point of your average cost curve, you are productively efficient. So if you have your average cost curve where you have your output on your x-axis and your costs on your y-axis, if you move along your average cost curve, so this will be your short run average cost, where your marginal cost crosses at its lowest point. So remember, your marginal cost will cross your short run average cost at the lowest point on the curve, and at this point A, you are productively efficient. So you're productively efficient, as I said, when you're producing the lowest possible cost per unit of output. So the thing to note about this is it's in the short run. So it does also exist in the long run as well. So if we draw a similar diagram, but with the long run average cost curve, so we have costs on our y-axis and output again on our x-axis, then we know our long run average cost curve has the same shape. Then we have the short run average cost curves running down it like so. So on our long run average cost curve, you are productively efficient again at your lowest point on the curve. So that's when you're productively efficient. The next type of efficiency to look at is X efficiency. So X efficiency is essentially caused by organisational slack or a lack of motivation through lack of competitive pressure. So what that means is if you're in a monopoly, you can afford to maybe be a bit lax with how efficient you are as a workforce, and you're not necessarily working at your lowest point on the average cost curve. So if you're not working at the lowest point on the average cost curve, you're X inefficient. And this tends to exist with governmental organisations that maybe don't have that profit motivation. Or essentially, you're a monopoly and you're taking things for granted because of those high barriers to entry or exit. Now again, we can demonstrate this in a simple diagram of average cost where we have our output again on our x-axis and then costs be our average cost this time on our y-axis. And what you can see from our short run average total cost, so this is our short run average total cost, what you'll be able to see that in an X inefficient market, you'll be above your average cost curve. So you'll be at point A, and there'll actually be some organisational slack at this point here, and we'll call that X because you're X inefficient. Okay, so it's the idea that you're not producing at the lowest cost you possibly could, possibly because you've got a lack of motivation as a workforce, because you're not striving towards that profit maximization objective, or you could just be a monopoly taking it for granted that you are the only firm in that market and there's huge barriers to entry, so you're not going to be, there's a lack of competitive pressure there. So this is X inefficiency. The next one to talk about is allocative efficiency. And allocative efficiency occurs when price is equal to marginal cost. Now the reason for that is if you think if price was less than marginal cost, then what would be happening? Well, essentially, if the price is less than marginal cost, what that means is the last good you produced, it cost you a certain amount to make, but actually you're selling it for less than it cost you to make. So if you're doing that, the market's going to take advantage of that, consumers are going to over-consume that, and you've clearly overproduced it. Equally, if your price is greater than your marginal cost, what that means is, for the last good you produce, it costs you a certain amount, but the price you're selling it for is greater than that amount, so it's not maximizing efficiency for that consumer, it's not maximizing well-being for them. So this will be underconsumed and underproduced. So therefore, if we know price is less than marginal cost, means the good is overproduced and overconsumed, and when the price is greater than marginal cost and it's underconsumed and underproduced, then where it's allocatively efficient, what that means is our price is equal to our marginal costs, and that's where we're allocatively efficient. Dynamic efficiency is essentially when you are productively efficient and also allocatively efficient, but it's essentially the idea that if your firm gains supernormal profits, over time you can use these efficiencies to improve your production process. So you can drive costs down, you can put in elements of research and development to make sure that your product is actually producing at its lowest possible value and becoming dynamic in its production process, therefore driving costs down. So essentially it's static efficiency, which is where you're productively efficient, efficient, and allocatively efficient, and over time you eventually become dynamically efficient. The first thing I want to talk about now is efficiency in a perfectly competitive market. So as you can see, we can draw this on a diagram because we have our revenue and costs curves and our output on our x-axis, revenue cost on our y-axis, and we can start drawing in our cost curves to show why these are productively, allocatively efficient and also efficient. So our average cost curve, as we know, is shaped like this. So that's our average total costs, and then from that we know the marginal cost crosses at the lowest point on the average total cost curve, and our price is where the two of those meet at P1. So the reason why this is productively, allocatively and efficient is, well, firstly let's think of the definitions. So if it's allocatively efficient, our price is equal to marginal cost, as we discussed before. So if our price is equal to marginal cost, it's allocatively efficient. Now if you look over to the diagram, you'll see that our price does equal our marginal cost, and therefore it's allocatively efficient at this point here. So we know that satisfies our allocatively efficient definition, that price is equal to marginal cost. As well as that, it's also productively efficient, because as we know, productive efficiency is where we're at the lowest point on our average cost curve, and as discussed earlier, our marginal cost crosses our average total costs at this lowest point. So therefore you can see that we are productively efficient at this point A. And finally, we're also efficient in a perfectly competitive market. Now efficiency happens when there's some organisational slack and you're not actually producing on your average cost curve. But as we can see at point A, we are producing on our average cost curve there. If we were producing anywhere above our average cost curve, somewhere around here, we would in fact be inefficient. Okay, so if we were producing at B, we would be inefficient, and there'd be some organisational slack, not necessarily from competitive pressure, lack of competitive pressure, because this is a perfectly competitive market, but for other reasons that would be that you're inefficient. However, we know that in a perfectly competitive market there's lots of competition, and therefore you are producing at A, so you are in fact efficient. So these are the reasons, as you can see from just one diagram, you can explain. So if it's in an exam and they tell you to explain why in a perfectly competitive market firms are productive, allocatively and efficient, you can do that from this diagram. The final thing I want to look at is efficiencies in monopolies. So in monopolies, it differs from perfect competition in that it's productive, allocatively and inefficient. So this is apologies, this is wrong on my PowerPoint. So this should be inefficient. Okay, and the reason it should be inefficient is that firstly, if we look at the definitions, so allocatively efficient is our price equal to marginal cost. Well, if we look at our price, we know that the price is at P1 here in a monopoly, as this is the maximum price they can charge at this quantity Q1. So if you look, is our price equal to our marginal cost? No, our marginal cost is this curve here, and our price does not meet at that point. So therefore, it will not be allocatively efficient because our price, as you can see, is actually above our marginal cost. So it's greater than our marginal cost, which means that firms are basically under-consuming. Consumers are under-consuming and firms are underproducing that good. Firms are also productively inefficient because, as you can see from the diagram, we're producing at this quantity here, Q1. So you're actually producing at this point B on the average total cost curve. And as we can see, that's not the lowest point on the average cost curve, because where marginal cost crosses the average total cost curve, that's the lowest point. So they're productively inefficient as well. They also can be said to be X inefficient. Now the reason they can be X inefficient is because there's a lack of competitive pressure within the market. So they have very little incentive to work at their maximum efficiency. So they don't drive costs down, and they don't produce on their average total cost curve. They actually produce above it at some point, probably around here. So they'd be X inefficient at this point. Now within a monopoly, yes, we have said that they are productively, allocatively and X inefficient, and with perfect competition they're X allocatively and productively efficient. Now, although this can be true in theory, if you look in practice, because of economies of scale and firms with things like dynamic efficiency as well, where firms can lower costs over time through research and development, monopolies we know make huge supernormal profits. So actually they can, through economies of scale, they can reduce their costs and actually possibly become more productively efficient and allocatively efficient than certain products in perfectly competitive market. And also through economies of scale, they can become more dynamically efficient than in a perfectly competitive market. So although in theory this is true, in practice it's not necessarily the case. And this video has just talked you through all the different efficiencies and then looked at how they affect those two markets. But if you're evaluating in an essay, it's really good to know that this is not always the case in the real world. So you can put through your evaluative and analyze those markets, which will really get you those high marks in the essay.